Welcome to today's webinar, City Forward, How Innovation Districts Can Embrace Risk and Strengthen Community, hosted by the Maryland Department of Planning in association with the Smart Growth Network. My name is Michael Bayer. I'm the Manager of Infrastructure and Development at the Maryland Department of Planning and Project Manager for the Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse. The Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse is a project of the Smart Growth Network, supported by the US EPA's Office of Community Revitalization and managed by the Maryland Department of Planning. In addition to hosting webinars, the Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse has a website at smartgrowth.org that provides information on effective growth, development, and preservation practices. The Clearinghouse provides information to help local decision makers foster healthy, resilient, and economically vibrant communities. The Clearinghouse is also the virtual home of the Smart Growth Network, a nationally recognized coalition of leadership organizations that have formally endorsed the principles of smart growth. This webinar is one in a series of webinars produced by the Maryland Department of Planning on smart growth and planning topics available for viewing at smartgrowth.org. You can also find out about planning initiatives, planning tools, and educational opportunities in Maryland by visiting the Maryland Department of Planning's website at planning.maryland.gov. We are recording this webinar and will be posting it on our website under the Webinar Archives tab. We encourage you to visit the website and to subscribe to our e-newsletter to learn about our upcoming webinars. The views expressed by the speaker in this webinar are those of the speaker and not necessarily of the Maryland Department of Planning or the state of Maryland. Viewers of this live event are eligible to receive 1.5 CM credits from the American Planning Association and 1 Equity CM credit, as well as 1.5 CNUA CEU self-reported credits from the Congress for the New Urbanism. To log your AICP credits, visit the American Planning Association's website at planning.org, log into your account, and search for the name of today's event, which is City Forward, How Innovation Districts Can Embrace Risk and Strengthen Community. You can also search for event number 925-7182. I would like to acknowledge our webinar partner today, Island Press, and their partnerships manager, Jen Hawes. Founded in 1984, Island Press's mission is to provide the best ideas and information to those seeking to understand and protect the environment and to create solutions to its complex problems. So today our speaker is Matt Enstice. Matt is the president and CEO of the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus Incorporated in Buffalo, New York. In this role, he is leading a pioneering initiative to integrate innovation, healthcare services, life sciences, clean energy, health and well-being, entrepreneurship, and education to revitalize the city of Buffalo and the Buffalo Niagara region. Matt has led the nonprofit organization since its formation in 2002. Matt is also a member of the steering committee for the Global Institute on Innovation Districts and has served on numerous boards, including the Buffalo Niagara Partnership, the Buffalo Renaissance Foundation, Niagara University, Damon College, and the School of Visual Arts Design for Social Innovation. Matt has been a member of the 50 by 50 Transportation Commission, which is part of the Alliance to Save Energy, and he also hosts the Talking Cities podcast. Following his presentation, Matt will answer as many questions as time permits. And as always, you can submit a question anytime by using the questions tool that's located in the control panel on the right side of your screen. And as usual, we're going to start with a quick poll here, just asking where everybody is from. And you can see the options there. If you're having any trouble responding to the poll, you may need to exit from full screen mode. And we'll give everybody about a minute to respond. And thanks to everybody who's participating today. And see the responses coming in. Give you a few more seconds. And the response here, 30% Mid-Atlantic Northeast, 27% in the South, 20% in the Midwest, 15% in the West, and 7% outside the US, including Canada and Mexico. So with that, we have, since Matt's from Buffalo, We have a second poll question for you, especially for NFL fans. Which team has the best fan base? And you can see the responses there. You have many to choose from, so we'll see where this comes out. Very serious today. Of course, Buffalo Bills. Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Matt. Welcome, Matt.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for having me here today. Make sure I've got all this in order, and I think we're ready to go.
We're still waiting to see
Great.
your.
Well, thanks again for. Oh, you don't see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, hold on a second. And show. Let me just see. Show my screen. And I'll do this. Does that work?
Yes, once you're in full screen mode, you're good to go. There you go.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for having me here. Before I kick this off, I just want to say a few thank yous here. First to Island Press, Jen, Jamie, Heather, Julie. They've all been great partners for us here at the medical campus and as we've got the book going. So thank you very much to them. I want to thank Ed Salzberg, who might be online here today. Ed was the person who inspired me to write the book and get this going a few years ago. So thank you, Ed. And I do want to thank Mike Luck. For those of you, someone help you book or whatever, has been one of the greatest people to work with on doing that. And Mike was a big part of this. So thank you, Mike. You know, one of the things that you see out here in doing these webinars in the new world that we live in is I find it very, very difficult to actually do this because I'm one of those people that really enjoys interacting with a crowd, people, because I think that's what it's really about is having this as a dialogue. So I'm going to go through these slides, give you a quick overview, tell you some stories, and then hopefully we can have a strong question and answer as we go through this. And for those of you who took the poll, thank you very much. Go Bills. You know, Bills Nation is very, very strong. I don't know if anybody saw the videos from, even though they lost in Miami, there were Bills fans everywhere taking over Miami, and it was great to see. So, with that said, my background, I grew up in Buffalo, went to high school here, went to Hobart College, which is actually in Geneva, New York, moved to New York City after living a little bit in LA. I worked for Saturday Night Live for 5 years on the production side for a gentleman by the name of Lorne Michaels, and really learned a lot from him. And then my wife and I decided that we were gonna move back to Buffalo, raise our family, and that's when I got involved with the medical campus in the early 2000s. The previous mayor, Tony Masiello, asked why our community didn't have a medical campus. It had all the resources, and it really came down to people weren't talking together, people didn't understand how to spell collaboration, and it was it's been the last 20 years have been a real learning journey for me about people, about communities, and about cities, and how to do great things. And along that way, I've done some not so great things and made mistakes and learned from them. And that's what we're really hoping this book would do. So, this just came in. Where I am in my life right now, my wife and I were empty nesters. Our 2 kids are in college. I have a daughter who's a senior musical theater major, and my son is a freshman in college. So we're empty nesters. We're getting to re-know each other again and having fun with it, and working a lot at the stuff that I'm about to talk about. So the medical campus, really BNMC, we have our major institutions and a cancer institute, the University of Buffalo Medical School, the Kaleida Health System, which is the largest healthcare institute in the area. We've got some smaller partners in there, from the largest group of private practice doctors to research institutions to Hearing and Speech Center, Olmsted Center. We've got all these players in one area. And 20 years ago was, you're all here. What can happen if we all come together? And from building out the BNMC, the medical campus, our team, the BNMC, focuses on how do you place make, how do you build out the district and make it a place that people want to come to. On the transportation side, most recently, we've just received 2 different grants at 10 million each to really look at how do you build out transportation systems and networks to allow for accessibility for disadvantaged communities. And so we're going through that. One is with the federal government, one's with the state. Really great opportunities with our transit partners and our university here, and our local LISC. I know LISC has been very involved with this organization. The innovation community, we are very focused on innovation, and I'm going to talk a bit about that, especially with underrepresented individuals and figuring out how it's not about what people know, it's about having access to opportunities is what we've learned over the years. So we try to figure out how do we address that. And then I'm going to talk a bit about our health and well-being, because at the core of this, health and well-being, mental health, the environments that people are in is critically important to having successful cities. So quick background on our campus to put it into perspective. We're 120 acres today. When we started, we were roughly around 100 acres, but we've grown with the community, not going in and taking over land like I've seen in a lot of different areas. We've worked with the community on any of that type of development, not always going perfectly, and I'm going to talk a bit about that. Today on the campus, we currently have 9 million square feet of space. When we started this in the early 2000s, we had about 4.5 million square feet. In total, it was about $1.5 billion worth of public and private investment. We currently have about 150 companies that are located on the campus, and there's 16,000 employees. You see what's on this list here of what we're doing and how we're thinking about the development and the growth that's there. Our vision, again, you can read this, but at the core of it, it's collaboratively growing an environment that fosters sustainability, health, and well-being. All doing this to create Buffalo as a great city with all the different components and parts that make our city the great place that it is. Our mission, you see me in this room right here. This is our boardroom. That's been on the wall for probably about 15 years when we moved into this building. It's something that we live by and believe in. And it's, you know, something that we think about every day is how do we integrate networks and bring people together and work with people to go far. The core of this slide and our mission is to make sure that there's access for all in everything that we're doing. So now the book. As I said, Ed really, you know, guided me and helped me, you know, think about writing this book. And as we started to go through it, these are the chapters in the book. And I'm just going to take a few stories about the learning journey along the way. So here we go. This slide is an unscientific study that I tend to talk about when I started to really think about Buffalo. And as I said, my wife and I moved back to New York from New York City. And, you know, I look at Buffalo, and Buffalo is an amazing place to live for 10 to 20% of the population. It's a good to very good for another 40 to 50% of the population. And then the rest of the population, it's really challenging. And this isn't, you know, special to Buffalo. This is what we see in a lot of urban environments and urban cities. And the focus is how do you work with everybody to make sure that people have access? And I'm going to say this multiple times throughout this conversation. Kyrie on our team really coined the phrase of integrating networks. And what we started to learn was the way you do this is you bring diverse groups together, get them talking and thinking about things, and that's how really positive outcomes happen. And so that's a big part of what we're doing. So this first slide here, one of the chapters, good luck, it'll never happen. This lesson was really part of the reason that it started to show why that unscientific study is the way it is. And it was the scarcity mentality. This quote right here was, good luck, it'll never happen. This is when we first started thinking about this. I was out there. I've had amazing volunteers help build this. And it all started with a gentleman by the name of Tom Beecher, who was the original chair of the board. I've had multiple great chairs since. Currently, a gentleman by the name of Ted Walsh is our chair of the board, phenomenal to work with. And I still have some of them still very involved, like Bill Joyce, and they have become a part of the ethos of what we're building here. And as we went out and started to meet people in the community, ask them what they were thinking, this was a quote from the individual that led the business community. It's the equivalent of the Chamber of Commerce. And we said, look, we're going to try to build this medical campus, leverage the assets that are here, and hopefully will be a great benefit for the rest of the community, like we've seen in other areas. Like we visited what was going on in Boston back then and what was going on in Houston at the Texas Medical Center. And this quote was said because of scarcity mentality. It was about protecting just the existing businesses and not thinking about, if we give access to everybody, what does this look like? And so we started to look at this and say, we need to, as we build out this medical campus, make sure that it's not an isolated island, that others are involved with this. And if I go to my next slide, what do the neighborhoods have to do with this? And early on, it was about the medical campus. It was about, how are our institutions going to spin off companies and create great opportunities? But we worked with a gentleman by the name of Alex Krieger. Alex at the time was the chairman of the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. I think he's chair emeritus there now. And a gentleman by the name of David Gamble, who's a professor at Harvard and has his own architecture and planning firm. And they said, as you build this out, you really do need to put your neighborhoods at the board, be as transparent as possible. And while that's talked about a lot now, 20 years ago, that was kind of like, nope, we're single-minded, we work in silos, and that's how we're going to get things done. But this was a really important moment because Alex and David, along with one of our board members who was actually a chair of the board at one point in time, they said, one of the leaders said, what do the neighborhoods have to do with this? We don't need them at this. And it was a really important point by that former chair. He said, look around the table. And the table was made up of a bunch of people that looked like me and 20 years older. And he said, none of us know what it's like to live in these neighborhoods. No one knows what it's about and what can help those neighborhoods. And in return, help what we're doing. So we built our board with that in place. And I will say that was one of the greatest things that we did, while not perfect. And if you Google, tensions with the neighborhoods, yeah, they existed. But I would say on the whole, they're in very good shape. We still have bumps along the way, but you're going to have that when you're trying to make developments in communities. And I will highlight one of the other conversations, early conversations, was with a Jesuit, a gentleman by the name of Father Vincent Cook. And Father Vincent Cook was the president of Canisius College at the time. And he said to myself and Tom Beecher, he said, you're taking on a big project that's probably going to ruffle some feathers. He said, when you get resistance, go on, keep doing what you're doing, but keep the door open to those that are giving you resistance and continue to try to move forward. And I got to tell you, that was some of the best advice, because all those individuals or groups that we ran into resistance with, and we did move on and tell them the door is wide open, they eventually came along and got involved with us. So listen to all the voices. This is a really important part of part of the book, but in making this and having all those voices, and as I talked about, having the voices at the table and be as transparent as possible, was absolutely critical to what we're doing. And the best story I can tell about this was a lady by the name of Jan Peters. Jan was the original one of the neighborhood's representatives on our board of directors. And at an early meeting, one of the chairs of the board of one of our institutions said, you know, what we're doing is going to be great for the community. This is a great initiative, and it's going to bring them along and make them better, something along those lines. And Jan looked at, and this was one of the most successful business people in our city. And Jan looked across the table at him and said, you know, in all due respect, you have no idea what you're talking about. And everybody kind of, you know, took aback to it. And she then went on and started to explain the community. And what it did was it reminded people around that table, one of the most important things I learned from this great neurosurgeon, Nick Hopkins, was it reminded everybody around that table, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And listening is so critical, especially when it comes to strengthening cities and building cities and integrating with communities and neighborhoods. So that is a core theme throughout the book. Mr. and Mrs. Mackey, two really interesting people. Our neighborhood to the east of us is back in the 40s through probably about the 60s. It was very German neighborhood. It's called the Fruitvale Neighborhood because the names of the streets actually fruits, and they actually used to have the fruit trees throughout the neighborhood. Over time, it started to become mainly populated by African American community, and it was really unique with the Mackeys because Mr. Mackey was African American, Mrs. Mackey was Italian, and you didn't see a lot of that in the 60s and 70s. And Mr. Mackey, it was the house that he actually grew up in. And we were doing a development where we were going to grow a assisted living facility on the campus. And the community said, you know what, it's actually moving from a place that's in the community about 10 blocks east of where we're currently located. And they said, we'd really like to keep it in the neighborhood on one side of the street. And we said, okay, great. But along the way, there were houses. There were 5 houses that needed to, that were where the development would potentially go. So with the community, we started having these conversations, and that's really what the community wanted. But the story is, you know, our institutions were immediately like, okay, let's get an appraisal and let's offer that amount of money to them. And the reality was, it was nothing. It was like $20,000 and nobody could really do anything. And I said to the board, I said, look, I'm not going to do this, and I don't think you want to do this, where you offer someone $20,000, they take the money, and they're in a way worse position moving forward. So everybody walked away with, on average, over $150,000. And at the time, you could get a very nice house in the neighborhood. You could stay in the neighborhood. You could move to another neighborhood. It was a really good option. But Mr. Mackey and all those individuals, I would go into their house, I'd sit down, I'd meet with them, and I'd learn from them. Mr. and Mrs. Mackey, I had many, many meetings. Our mayor of Buffalo currently today, Byron Brown, came in and he sat down with me. The majority leader of New York State's Assembly, Crystal Peoples, sat down with me, and we met with this family and we tried to work through it. And we got to the point that we had offered him, it was over $250,000. We offered moving expenses, tax, and we'd cover their upgrade and taxes for the next 10 years. But the real kicker, when we got down to like, we've got to make a decision one way or the other, was we gave him healthcare for life. And Mr. Mackey looked at me, and I'll never forget this, and he said, you know, he just told me, Matt, you know, he loved living here. He's always been here. He loved waking up every morning and looking across the street, and that was what he was comfortable with, and that's what he was going to do. So I walked away, and I was like, man, I can't believe we couldn't figure this out, and you know, I don't have any other tools. And so I don't know, it was the next day or next few days, I connected back up with Mr. Mackey, and we were just talking about it. And I said, you know, I really respect it. It was nice to get to know you. You know, if you ever need anything, give me a call. And he said something, and I said, you know, Mr. Mackey, I'm gonna have one last try here. I said, Mr. Mackey, would you actually do this as a favor for me? And he looked right at me and he goes, okay, you got a deal, I'll move. And it just learned from me that like he just needed me to go that little extra yard to show him how important he was, not just to me, but to the community. And I'll never forget that. It was really, really tough time, but it was a great little story about integrating with people. Pastor William Gilliston, unfortunately, a few months ago, he passed away. And Pastor Gilliston, as you see on the side, was a big community leader, but he actually became a great personal friend to me. And how it came about was a really, really interesting story. So I was asked by one pastor, he said, you know, Pastor Gilliston is saying that you're a bad person and you're doing bad things. And I said, you know, that's interesting because I don't even know Pastor Gilliston. Who is he? And I said, I'd love to meet him. Let's have a conversation. So they set up a meeting. I go over to his church, which is one of the largest congregations in the city of Buffalo. And we sit down and we start talking. And it was Pastor Gilliston and two other pastors that we walk into the meeting with. And these two other pastors just start kind of yelling at me and telling me all the bad things that I've done and all the bad things that I'm going to do. And I actually didn't even know what they were talking about. And I said, look, after they were done talking, I said, can I tell you my thoughts on this? And I explained each point they had. And I said, you know, here's why what you're saying, I don't think is true. And we went through the whole thing. And Pastor Gilliston didn't say a word. And, you know, that was probably 40 minutes into this meeting. And after I finished, he looked at me and he said, Mr. Enstice, we owe you an apology. We were just going with, you know, kind of perceptions. And we actually didn't look into the facts. And he said, would you be willing to help us? I said, well, what do you want? He said, well, would you meet with us? And so this was probably about 5-6 years ago. They set up this group. We call it our Better Together group. And we used to have it in this room right here. And it was all about how working together. And what it ended up being was about a group of 20 pastors, some from the west side, some from the east side, and I call them the Catholics in the middle. And it was all different backgrounds and voices. And it was about communication and getting that communication tool out there. And it quickly turned into education reform, where this group was really strong. And these pastors, I said, you know, what can I continue to do? And what I would do is bring the business community together. And then they would bring the community and the pastors group together. And we'd go to our elected officials and say, you know, there's this burning issue on education reform that needs to take place. And it started to happen. They started to change the way voting for the board here happens. And they're talking about building an institute for education reform here at the University of Buffalo that really was built around our Better Together group getting together, and Pastor Gilliston was the major driver and will be deeply lost. But it would all started with, if we didn't have that open conversation to build the trust that we did, and that's what happens a lot in communities, is people don't talk, especially when you come from different backgrounds. And I've learned a lot from that. Our table of trust continued. This is Reverend Michael Chapman. Back in, you know, it was probably around 2008 is when I met Reverend Chapman, maybe a little earlier. And we started to build this partnership and this relationship around, we got this grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. We went after it. 1,000 applicants went after this, and they gave it to, I think it was about 25 communities across the country. And most of them, it was for active living by design. And most of it was like redoing trailways. And ours was, how do you integrate the medical campus and the surrounding communities to build it in an active way? So when we get federal money to redo streets and sidewalks, how do you build active living into that? And it was things like that. And there was building art and placemaking into it. And Reverend Chapman was very helpful with what we were doing there. And we were very helpful with his redevelopment of the neighborhood, where he's building new housing and community type centers. And what is most important about this is we end up getting the grant, but we had to go on a trip to Baltimore, and Pastor Chapman did not like to travel, but he did for this grant. And after we got the grant, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation said to us, you know, we actually didn't believe you had this relationship with the pastor, but when you walked in for that interview in Baltimore, you immediately got the grant. Like once you saw that you were building this together, we figured you were different than all the other ones, and we wanted to see what would happen. And what started to happen was a lot of great things happened on the campus, a lot of great things Pastor Chapman and his church led in the neighborhoods. But I do have to highlight right now, there's a development going on that he's leading. He has a partner in it. And, we really haven't been communicating. It kind of just happened, and we're having a struggle. And fundamentally, it's coming down to we're not communicating appropriately. So we're continuing to try to get in the room, figure out how to do this together, and work through it. And the reason I bring all that up in full disclosure is, hey, we're working on this, and it's never perfect. And you can't say we put a structure in place and it works and it's great, and you don't have hiccups along the way. When you have those hiccups, you have to continue to work through it. So I bring that up as a story. This whole, if you want our money, you have to do this together. This was really headed by two gentlemen, Tom Baker and Erky Kelborn, who were heading the Aicp Foundation, which was the largest foundation. I don't know if it still is in our community, but it's one of the largest. And they said, over the years, we've just given out these grants, but if all the institutions come together and have a plan, we'll support it. And if you have the neighborhood at the table, we'll support it. And then that led to New York State and the federal government. And we raised hundreds of millions of dollars. And that led to our institutions building. Like, as I said, we went from 4.5 million square feet to 9 million square feet. The jobs growing from having roughly 8,000 to 16,000 employees in this area. But the other key critical thing that happened when we started collaborating was we started to see that within the last 5 to 10, 8 years, 30% of all permits pulled in the city of Buffalo were within a 1 mile radius. So housing, restaurants, all of those type of developments were starting to happen because we did it together. And what that then led to was leveraging infrastructure. I talked about us redoing our streetscape, and I remember this moment we were meeting with at the time, she was then Senator Hillary Clinton, and we were meeting with her office, and they said, okay, what do you want this year for streetscape infrastructure? And at the time, if you all remember, it was when pork existed and people could dole out money relatively easily. And what happened was we ended up we said we want money for the surrounding neighborhoods, and that led to probably about another $10 million ended up going into the surrounding communities, new streets, new sidewalks, new trees, new great lifestyle things. And it was really, really important to what we were doing. Another great partner in a lot of this group being about sustainability, my next two slides really get into, a lot of people, because I'm the CEO of the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus, they all think I know healthcare. I don't know healthcare. I know great people who are doing healthcare on our campus is about all I have. What I would say that our team has become experts in is really on infrastructure, because our role was to make sure that the right infrastructure was in place. And back in this was probably about 2006, National Grid, utility based out of the UK, they have major presence in New York and Massachusetts. They came to me and they said, you guys are rebuilding this medical campus. Can we start thinking about it and build a plan with you to look at energy of the future? So it started testing things like street lights that were 100% off the grid. And I do have to say, we put those in a parking lot to test it out. They worked great for 2 years and then they stopped working. So that was part of the failures and learning from it and trying to push innovation out there, because it's not easy to innovate. This is another great one, back in 2011, we put 21 electric vehicle charging stations out on our campus, and it was great. National Grid asking me to do it, and I actually started driving an EV at that point because we put in all this infrastructure. And I was like, oh man, we spent this money if nobody else ever uses this. And Grid helped subsidize it to test this out, and it was great, but that happened. We built a bioswale at the south end of our campus. Instead of going through and doing, drainage and all of that, we actually set it up and had it so it was a bioswale and had the environmental benefits from all that. I didn't even know what a bioswale was at the time, but it really is something that really, I think, was such a benefit to the sewer system. And I never thought I'd be talking about sewer systems or getting excited about sewer systems and showing it to people. Car share and jump bike, another great story, but also I would say a failure. And sometimes our finance committee reminds me of this. So we started car share, which was like a zip car for the community, and built that up. But jump bike was, we started to see in New York City and larger cities like what they have is City Bike, which is a great program, but it wasn't affordable to Buffalo. And so we found this individual out of Brooklyn who created a new model that put all the brains of the bike in the bike, not necessarily in the docking station. And we funded it, and we gave him his seed money. He had some friends and family money, and we put in some seed money, and we were the pilot ourselves. And ironically, or bizarrely, the San Francisco airport where he started to run this. And, you know, he went on, did his thing. We built up the program here in Buffalo, and it's a great program that supports the community. But the moral of the story is when we put that original money in, I didn't take a piece of the company. And then one day I was reading the Wall Street Journal, front page of the Wall Street Journal was jump bike sells to Uber for $200 million. And we walked away with nothing on that one. So live and learn. And, you know, as we do stuff, we start to say, you know, that's how we're going to continue to fund our entity, by taking pieces of that type of investment along the way. The second one that I want to highlight here is a company called Verity Parente. It's actually just called Verity now. And full disclosure, I've been very involved with this company. I'm actually on the board of directors of the company. And this company really started, it's a whole nother story or conversation or webinar. But what it started by, as I talked about the innovations in energy that we were doing, the founder of the company is a gentleman by the name of John Williams, and he was watching what we were doing. He was actually building the street lights for us. He's an environmental remediation contractor. And he was kind of, at the time, saying, you know, making fun of me for some of this green stuff. And he said, what are you doing? And this was back in 2011. And I said, honestly, I don't know, but I find it interesting. And National Grid's asking a lot of questions. So I think there's something here in this green revolution, but I don't know what it is. So I'm just going to keep trying stuff. And he started making more fun of me. I said, okay, you know, he's an environmental remediation contractor that owns a lot of excavator equipment. I said, well, if you're so smart, why don't you go build an electric excavator? So back in 2012, he built the first green excavator. And the company Verity is actually the largest OEM of electrified construction equipment. If you Google, like our major one that's out there that people see is we have a Case 580 and a one for Bobcat. If you Google electric excavator Bobcat, that's actually the product from this company. So that started to happen, but then it realized, and what it built out was battery packs. So this company just got approved for the first installation of a 600 kW installation of lithium-ion batteries inside of a building. CSA certified, UL certified, fire marshal approved, and figured out how to do it. And ironically, it was at our Nobel Laureate's Research Institute. They were buying a new microscope, and as they were buying a new microscope, what ended up happening was they were going to have to do a major utility upgrade with National Grid, and in partnership with National Grid and NYSERDA and the New York Power Authority, we built this pilot to test it out, and it's installed and goes live, I think, in the next week or two. I'm just not in the weeds of the company. So you're going to see a new way of sustainability, and more importantly, you know, moving forward through storage, the, you know, decarbonization revolution that I think we're all looking at. And I know we're international on this call, but, you know, everything that the government is investing in right now. But the one thing that I really want to highlight that came out of this partnership was something that Verity learned from watching a lot of the stuff that we were doing. And so Verity is about to hire roughly 500 people within the next 12 months. And what they did was they formed a nonprofit, actually funded. We approved it as a board, along with 2 foundations and a bank. And it's going to create its own staffing agency for the community. The board is made up of people in the community. They will have a stake in the company. So as the company does well, the people in the community can start to build wealth in this. But it really is trying to figure out, how do you build that model to connect companies to the economic opportunities to the less fortunate and give them the opportunities as this takes off. So that's that one. Community solutions, I put this in, someone said, why do you put this in? I said, just because Roseanne Haggerty is one of the greatest leaders in this space that I know of. If you don't know of Roseanne, look up her work at Community Solutions. She was a MacArthur Genius. She was most recently won that big award that the MacArthur Foundation did for, I think it was $100 million. And follow her, learn from her. She's a great person to learn from and get to know. Our health and well-being team is doing a lot in this space, integrating with the community and figuring things out. You know, social design is critical as you go through looking at health and well-being. Mental health, I just was at a Chamber of Commerce meeting this morning where we had the superintendent of schools come in and talk about mental health in these kids who the last 2 years didn't have the education. So a big part of what we do is health and well-being in the community. The WELL standard, our team is certified for that, and we'll hopefully start to train people in our community to be certified and have their buildings and their communities and their developments well certified. So that's going forward. But the thing I want to highlight here is one of the greatest things that came out of that Robert Wood Johnson Foundation was we met an urban planner by the name of Samina Raja, who is at the University of Buffalo. And Samina Raja has a food lab, and if you read the book or if you buy the book and read it, and we'll give it a plug later that you get 30% off for being on this call today. But Samina had something that I use all the time, and I talk about this. And one of the big things when you go top down, it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because everybody thinks about, oh, we got to create this new table. We got to go there and show people how smart we are. And what Samina said was, if you really look at communities and you're genuine about it, the big thing that you see is there's tables that already exist. And what you really need to do instead of create the table is get invited to those tables. Go there, back to my theme that I talked about earlier. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So go there and listen, learn, meet new people, and figure out how can you build a better community by doing all of that. And so our team is doing a great program. Beth, who leads that for us, is going to be leading this program. It's coming up in a couple weeks. It's on our website, and it's food is medicine. It's tied in the healthcare facilities here, and it's really pulling diverse groups together to start to look at, you know, health disparities in communities and starting to think about food as medicine and building stuff out and changing policy. Kyrie, this is Kyrie and DJack, Derek Jackson, who I've gotten to know. Kyrie works on our team, and two things have come out of this. They've really been great individuals who have, you know, in a way asked me to mentor them and work with them. And I said, the only way I'm going to do it is if it's two-way mentoring, because what you know, I don't know. And what I might have knowledge in, you might not. So if we do this, it's going to be a lot of listening and working together to help get each other stronger in areas that we're not. And I talked about it earlier. Kyrie coined the phrase integrating networks, because what we started to learn, especially over the pandemic, was when they were talking about things that the community was looking for, I would say, oh, just go talk to this person. And they're like, well, we can't just call that person. And I started to learn that, oh, yeah, those things that I think are a lot easy might not be easy to them. And it's kind of vice versa. So we really started to build that out. We started to, you know, during the pandemic, you know, Kyrie and I would have meetings in my backyard where people couldn't meet, but it was really to continue the conversation and see how we could integrate into the community and do development. So I just wanted to highlight them because I would recommend to anybody, go out there, don't think you know everything, and really think through how can you be mentored to learn differently on a regular basis. This program I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about, and I am wrapping up so we can get into the Q&A, but this is really important. When we started building out, as I talked about, entrepreneurship, in that chart that I show, we focus a lot on the top 10%, 20%, whatever the number is, to say we're going to support those companies and then it'll have a trickle-down effect. You know, I've come to the real conclusion that that is not the best way to go about this. It is a way to do it, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't support, that we should support all percents, but we need to have equal voice and equal access on things. And I really learned a lot from this program called E4All. And what happened was, I have two things. On the left-hand side, you'll see I See Success. And what I See Success was, we started a program. This was about 6 years ago. I was walking through our building, and I was looking at all the companies that were here and all the people that were here. And it's the opposite of that early meeting with my board. It was, everybody looked like me. They were 20 years younger, and they just had more hair. And so what I started to do was to say, this has got to change, because I go into other communities and it's not like this. And so we created this program, I See Success. And it was okay, but the pandemic hit. And a lady by the name of Megan Smith, a great Buffalonian, who was Obama's chief technology officer, was one of the early employees at Google, asked me to sit on this call. Senator Schumer was bringing leaders across the country, brought about 10 together to talk about how, when stimulus money gets out there, it gets into the community. And that's when I learned about this program called E4All. They were on the call. I picked up the phone and I called them and I said, I want to buy what you have. They basically created our I See Success in a box and had a template for it. It was founded by a gentleman by the name of Desh Deshpande. He has the Deshpande Institute at MIT, been a very successful businessman. But the most important thing that I got to tell you about Desh is that he's an amazing human being. He's a kind person. And what his learning was that him just giving money to people isn't going to make the change, but him putting structure and infrastructure in place to learn from and teach people and give them an environment to be successful. And so what E4All did was, it gives a little bit of seed money, it creates programming, and it gives 3 mentors on an annual basis to 30 minority and women-owned businesses. And Juaria, who is actually the leader of it for us here in Buffalo, who just had a kid. So if she's listening, congratulations. Hope Adam and you and the family are doing well. But she's led this. In the first year, or first half of this year, when we went out and did this, we had 26 applicants. Word of mouth got out there. People started to see what it was. We had 87 applicants, which showed us there's a need here. And this program is growing, and they're building it like a family. And then Eve Forever is a sister organization, which is very similar to YPO. So after you go through the programming, you still have a place to go to be in that cohort and to continue being mentored and feeling like you're a part of something. And so I really, really wanted to highlight that. I'm going to give a plug. If there's anybody from the federal government that's on this, or state government, I believe E4All should be a program that every community gets funding from the state. I think the federal government should take a real hard look at this, because if they really want to talk about how you build a diverse, inclusive environment that offers access to all, this program starts to create that access point for all those things that can help someone be successful in their business. And lastly, I want to highlight this slide. These are the United Nations Sustainability Goals. And I was reading something that this came up, and our team has talked about this. And when I look at all the stuff that our team touches on, we touch about 8 of these. And I think about other innovation districts or anchor institutions or communities around the country, and they might touch on another 8 of them. And what I really believe in, and there's a group that I'm involved with called the Global Institute for Innovation Districts, that was founded by Julie Wagner and Bruce Katz. Some of you might have known them from Brookings, but they started this entity, and it started bringing people from all over the world. And I believe innovation districts, everybody has their own specialty in these in one way or another. And if we can continue to gather that data and grow and learn from all of those, I feel like everybody can play a part to reach these sustainability goals that the United Nations has put out there. And it's something that our team is going to continue to drive with and be a part of. So in closing, one of the common questions I get is, how did you go from SNL to running a medical campus? And what I say to that is, at the roots, it really started with Buffalo. And if you go around the world and you're wearing a Buffalo something and you find somebody from Buffalo, they come to you, they talk, they communicate on things, and they love being around, and there's a pride there. And I think that was something foundational that was built into me in the way I grew up. And then I went to SNL and I worked for Lorne, and what I learned from him was that his genius was about bringing diverse groups together and different minds and different people, and bringing the cast and the writers and the producers and the directors and the lighting and the scenery and the wardrobe. And you bring all those pieces together to create something amazing that SNL, like, whether you like this show or you don't, I mean, it's been in a US, or it's a global establishment for probably going on about 50 years now, but it was all about the genius of bringing people together. And at the end, I guess what I've seen with the BNMC is that by bringing people together, great things can happen. And I guess that's at the theme of this is you have to be willing to do that. You have to take that risk. And that's kind of what the book is about, and what I'm here to talk about. So one thing I would, I guess it's called a plug. I'm more than happy to travel around, come to different communities. I really love to come to talk to colleges and university classes, the students, I think, because they're the future, to talk about this book, get their input, see what they're thinking. So as we continue to do our work, I can learn from them, but also maybe they can take something away from the book. So if you have groups like that you want, if you want me to come to your family holiday dinner, I'll come to that too, if my wife will let me do that, and I'll come talk about this book and make your family gathering really exciting. No, whatever you think might be beneficial for you or for us, I'm more than happy to do that. And thank you very much for your time.
Great, thanks, Matt. And thanks everybody who submitted questions so far. We are going to go into the Q&A portion of our program now, and we'll have Matt turn on his camera so you can see him as we do that. And I will say we've gotten kind of a mix of questions, some that are very specific to what you were speaking about for the last 45 minutes or so, and then some other questions that may be more general about how to apply these in other areas. But let me start with this one, because one of our audience members asked if you could say again the names of the two organizations in the mentoring slide that you mentioned. Maybe you could talk more about that.
Oh, yeah, so it's called E4All. So I think it's eforall.org. And then the other one is E4Ever. But E4All is the core program. E4Ever is kind of just kicking off a little bit. So if you look up E4All, they're looking to scale across the country. They're about to do a major fundraise. And, frankly, we sponsored it with KeyBank. Was the initial funder that put in. M&T Bank eventually, put some money in, and some others. Bank of America came in, our National Grid, our healthcare providers. So if you want to do it in your community, you can be a sponsor of it and get it going. But as I said, I really believe this is something that governments should take a really, really strong look at funding, because I've seen all these programs for the last 20 years come through, and this is something that touches the people in the community directly, and I've never seen outcomes like this before.
Great, thanks, Matt. I'll just launch into the other questions here for you. And the first one here is from Blake, who asks, was the City of Buffalo's zoning rewrite helpful to your projects?
So I'm guessing it's the most recent one, which was like the green code and all of that development. And I think the answer is yes. I think it will be, because it's starting to look at, you're seeing bike lanes pop up. You're seeing people think about development, not it. There's still, go to planning board, they get the variance, and there's still, people working through that. But on the whole, I think, the initiative that the mayor took to create the green code was really, really important.
Okay, thank you. Next question here is from Monique McKenzie, who asks, what are the top attractions that have been built recently that recruit and retain employees at BNMC?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that you started to see was a consolidation of our medical school. You know, it was a massive undertaking, $500 million program. And what it did was it started to bring our university to the city. Canisius College is in the city, but the University of Buffalo is out in the suburbs. And that move, along with some healthcare consolidations, really started to create these developments. I'd also say the institutions making that major commitment, so the whole institution strategy concept. You know, when I talk to rating agencies or I talk to people who did development, whether it was residential or restaurants or other commercial developments, it's all based on, if you look at their applications, whether it's an IDA break or whatever, it's to service the medical campus. And that was, you know, the core of our institutions growing, and those investments created all those opportunities. So I hope that answered the question.
I think so, at least for me. Next question here says, what factors are most influential for innovators and entrepreneurs to locate in the district?
Yep. You know, it's interesting. I was just in New York City for their tech week, and this isn't against Silicon Valley or what's going on in San Francisco, because it's all great stuff. But after the pandemic, there's become this shift that, you know, I go to New York often and I love New York City, but it hasn't been the New York City when I lived there or been going there since the pandemic. But I got to tell you, the last time I was there was a buzz. And what I heard from the tech companies was that the next generation of student, worker, you know, thought leader, entrepreneur wants to be around holistic communities. They don't just want to be in a tech community. They want to be where artists are. They want to be where other creatives are, designers are. And I know a lot of people have talked about this stuff. Ironically, I was talking to this guy who I actually didn't know a lot about him, and you're all going to know him. There's this guy, Richard Florida, today. And, you know, it sounds like he has a similar thought on some of that stuff. I don't know it in depth. I'm going to learn more about it. But you know, that is what people are wanting in the community in our district. It's things that were, you know, cornhole tournaments. Like, I was kind of like, what is this? And it goes a long way. So little things are starting to build it, but I think the next generation wants to see that, and they want to see an environment that is accessible by everybody.
Great, thank you. Next one here is from Tim Casey, who's asking, do you have neighborhood folks on the overall board, on a community advisory board, and how do you get that input on a regular basis?
Yeah, so the community we actually have representatives from our two bordering neighbors are actually on the board of directors. So they sit at a meeting with the CEO and chairs of our institutions, and they're at the table, their voices at the table. And, you know, so we have quarterly board meetings. We have regular meetings that are like committee meetings that the individuals from the neighborhood can go to. So it's constantly there. You know, and again, I never ever want to pretend that it's 100% perfect, but I got to say, you won't even get close to 100% perfect if you don't have open lines of communication. And that's at the core of how our structure is set up. So these lines of communication are there, that there's never a time where someone could say, you know, don't, you know, I didn't know you were doing this, or I didn't know you were doing that, because we try to just have it as an open door policy with everything we're doing.
Thanks. Next one here is from Stacy Reidenbaugh, who asks, what was the catalyst for starting the Innovation District? Was there a blueprint from another city that inspired your vision?
No, and you know, the interesting part is that's, you know, when Ed asked me about writing this book, you know, I had someone say, write about the history of the medical campus. I was like, you know what, that's boring. Like, I wouldn't want to read that. But what I was missing was somewhat of a playbook about how to do this. So in the early days, it was literally our previous mayor said, you know, I'm looking at places like the Cleveland Clinic, the Texas Medical Center, or Longwood Medical Center in Boston. Why don't we have this? And what was we had a lot of the pieces, but we didn't have the brand, and we didn't work together. We didn't communicate together. So that was kind of the stimulus to get it going. Was this mayor asked a question, and then people started to talk, and then we started to get small wins together, and we started to realize at the time it really wasn't called an innovation district. We kind of backed into it becoming an innovation district because we were constantly looking at the next generation of opportunities and being opportunistic. So that's the other thing that I would say to anybody doing this. You've got to be opportunistic, see what's out there, learn what's out there, and then steal shamelessly. There's a lot more to steal shamelessly from than the early days when we started doing this. And we're constantly at peer groups, talking to other people in the space and learning from them. And as I mentioned, the Global Institute of Innovation Districts, Julie Wagner is heading up, is a great group to learn from.
Thanks, Matt. Next one here is from Nancy Abbs, who asks, what type of organizations are innovation districts usually set up as? For example, are they typically a political subdivision, a special district, a nonprofit, public-private partnership, et cetera? And how is your district set up?
It's a great question. So we're set up as a not-for-profit. Our not-for-profit owns, I think it's up to like 15 for-profit LLCs. The majority of them are for real estate related things. Some of them are like consulting arms that we do. So we go out there and we'll consult on our health and well-being work and our diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And sometimes we just go out and innovation whole, but that's what those LLCs are. It's all going to depend on what the makeup is of the players around the table. But I think the easiest, fastest way today, and it's what I know, so there could be a better way, is you're set it up as a not-for-profit that is, convening and bringing people together.
Okay, thank you. Next question here is, given the push and pull dynamics of the campus and its neighborhood partners, do you see additional innovative opportunities with the possible additions of the School of Dentistry or Nursing?
Yeah, so that's been a big conversation, when we first started this, that, the School of Medicine moves down, then you get nursing, dentistry, pharmacy, and one other one, and I'm blanking on public health, to move down here. We love it. I think that's got to get into the, if the University of Buffalo sees that as a priority for them, I think that having that synergy and that development down here would be great for our community. And so, yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Matt. Here's the next question from Alan Oberst. I'm not sure if you know him, but he mentions that there are a lot of great Buffalo names in this presentation, but one I didn't hear is the former BNMC COO, Patrick Whalen. Perhaps he's mentioned in the book, but what can you tell us about his role?
So Pat was a business person. I asked Pat, hey, do you want to come? He was looking for a job. And I said, well, just come help me do this stuff. And so at the time, I'm trying to think of when that was. It was probably in the early days. And I said, look, because he didn't know how to do any of the stuff. Like he was an amazing cross-border person. So if anybody ever needs cross-border, Pat Whalen's your person, especially US and Canada. And so he learned a lot on this, learning about, someone asked me nonprofits, he knew nothing. Really learned about that and, started to talk to companies about his life lessons and learnings from that. And so I think maybe part of the question is you bring multiple different people in. There's not one person that builds something, a lot of different people and expertise. And one of the biggest things that I think you really need around the table, and it's one of the words that the pastors use with me, is servant leaders, people that can check their ego at the door and really say, you know what, at the end of the day, I'm doing this to make the community a better place. And that's why, like, some of the people I did talk about, the Tom Beechers of the world, the Bill Joyces, it wasn't about them, and it didn't matter to them how they were pushed out there. They wanted to see the community do great things. So my big thing that I would say to people is, as you build these out, make sure you get the right people around the table and continue to make the table bigger, because you want those different voices around the table to build things.
Thanks, Matt. Several of the questions I think came from folks who either lived in Buffalo or are familiar with the area. So they reference UB, which is the University at Buffalo, I believe, or SUNY Buffalo. So one of our questioners mentioned that they went to graduate school at UB 2 decades ago. And so you've talked about many familiar neighborhoods, organizations, and names. And Samina was on his grad thesis advisor. Buffalo has transformed in the last 2 decades. Where do you see Buffalo in the next 10 years?
Well, you know, I think what I want to see, I think the clean tech revolution, I talked about that company Verity and growing jobs on the east side of Buffalo. I really believe that the clean tech side is what you're going to start to see. The tide in Niagara Falls, the New York Power Authority, NYSERDA, really groups making major investments. I think, you know, there's a whole climate plan that's out there for New York State right now. Well, I think it still needs a lot of work to not go about it exactly the way they want to do it right now. That's a whole nother conversation. But the key thing is I believe the leaders in New York State want to be key leaders in the energy revolution. And I think Buffalo is perfectly situated for that. I think it's perfectly situated for the cost of living. It's still a reasonable cost of living for people. And, you know, as I said, the Bills Mafia is out there. And, you know, once we start creating jobs like Verity and other tech companies, what you're going to start to see is people moving back. I mean, one of the main leaders that's going to be leading Verity, it was a high-powered individual from New York City that is moving back to Buffalo to help lead that company. And I think once companies like that start to grow and build, you're going to see others want to come back. There's a company in our building right now, Aicp Auctions, which is a company that went public, great people leading it. A lot of people have moved back to Buffalo. So I think you're going to see it as when you have a hybrid model, the lifestyle of living in Buffalo and Rust Belt cities, I do believe is going to start to take off.
That kind of coalesces with one of the questions that just came out here from James Schultz, who's asking, how have Buffalo expats helped you?
Yeah, I mean, it is that, like the expats, you know, again, when I was in New York City at Tech Week, I ran into a Buffalonian and then he was like, oh, there's a venture capitalist, there's a venture, like he introduced me to a whole bunch of people that were in from Buffalo, but leading the tech scene in New York City. And he said, you know, a lot of them would love to move back to Buffalo or have a tie to Buffalo. So I think, you know, people love Buffalo, and anybody who's not in Buffalo, I strongly recommend come take a tour. We'll show you around. It's a great place.
Great, thanks, Matt. The next question here is, can you discuss how you get colleges and universities active in your economic development efforts?
Yeah, I mean, so Buffalo is, they're on our campus, they play a major role in it, and so they're tied into it. What we've been focused on is like, so Niagara University, which is right near Niagara Falls, great university, headed by Father Marr, and what they're doing is starting to think about how do they have a presence down here. And so to answer the question, it's have it as an open platform, have people come in here and feel like they have an opportunity to integrate with it. Canisius College just down the street just got a new president. I'm going to be setting up a meeting with him and try to find a way that we can start to integrate the students into this. And it's not rocket science, but you have to stay at it and keep building these relationships to have an open environment for the college universities and especially the community colleges on the manufacturing side of things, or the trade side of things is the majority of it, not everything, but that's kind of what we're seeing.
Got it. Okay. Next question here is from Carrie Swanstrom, who's in California, and she asks, can this type of district be applied to an existing downtown or other commercial district, and how?
Yeah, the answer is absolutely. And it's not about, physically is important, yes, but it's about how you start to think and communicate and interact with people. And you know, as I said, ours district existed. We just never branded it as a district. We never communicated on a regular basis. And that was at the core of my job in the early days with the volunteers was, let's just make sure people are continuing to talk. Like we would have dinners once a month with the leadership just to get them in a room talking to each other. We don't have to do that once a month anymore because they're meeting on their own right now. So existing districts who have a lot of the bones and the framework in place to do great things, I believe can go to the next level by forming and putting in structures that there's a collaborative voice wanting to make that community better.
Thanks, Matt. Next question here is from Bennett Foster, who's in Georgia, who's asking, what role can or do metropolitan planning organizations and regional agencies play in advancing innovation districts?
Huge. So they're a big part of making sure that from a planning perspective, GBNRTC is a major leader in that here in Buffalo. All the transportation grants that I was talking about, making change in the way that infrastructure is distributed, is they have to be at the table and integrated with it. While I'm not in the weeds of it anymore, Jamie on our team, who heads up all our planning and development around this, is integrated with it. And those groups are at the table on a monthly basis. And it's not just to educate us, to educate that organization, but it's the other community groups that we bring around the table in those meetings to continue the conversation. And it's back to this, we're better together. And so yes, very, very important.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Stephen Ben Steenhughes, who's asking, is there pressure to continue to expand the campus? And how would expansion affect the surrounding neighborhood?
So pressure is a strong word. So like when the individual who asked the question about the dental school and I think it was nursing, we have all the land we need on our campus to do all the development for the foreseeable future. And one of the pledges that our institutions made was that we wouldn't go into the community and do any development. Early on, they were still doing it even when we were kind of saying it. But, you know, those were the early days when people didn't know we really did change this game. And when we make a statement and we say we're going to do something, we really have to do it. I would say, you know, we have amazing leadership now that understands the importance of community and the importance of their role in this community. So I don't see it disrupting the community. What the only disruption it'll have is as more development happens here, you know, what happens with transportation, traffic flow, that type of stuff. And we just have to be ahead of our time and make sure, you know, think forward and make sure that we have everybody around the table as the planning process takes place.
Thanks, Matt. And again, thanks to everybody who's submitting these questions, and you can continue to put them on through the questions tab. And I guess the next one here is your group involved with promoting active transportation?
Very much so. Again, I've been talking about Jamie on our team. Jamie is really leading that with the Transit Authority. I mean, our two grants, one was with LISC, and I always forget this, and the other was with the federal government, and I can't remember what it was through, but it was, so it's LISC, NYSERDA, federal government have all been a part of it. They're two separate $10 million grants, but within those grants, that's where we're bringing back this car share program, which is a nonprofit, like because it had an insurance issue. And when you started looking at the data, the majority of that car share program, which was like Zip car, was used by underrepresented individuals. Ready Bike, which is a great program here in Buffalo. Go Bike Buffalo, the leaders in getting bike lanes and in the whole bike environment going in a city like Buffalo. They're on the table constantly. And I would say that in a way, Jamie and our team act as a little bit of the duct tape or glue or whatever you want to call it to that community because we're consistently trying to pull everybody together. We're not the leader of it, we're just kind of maybe the convener of a lot of these. Those other groups that I mentioned are really leading different disciplines in that space. And, you know, pulling in the transit authority and the mayor's office and his team are a critical part of that. I think I answered the question.
Yes, I think so. If we have a follow-up question, I will share that as well. Next question here is from Richard Woodruff, who asks, does the city give property tax relief in the district?
No, I mean, we don't have any of that stuff. What you do have is a lot of the institutions are not-for-profits, so they would just not pay the taxes that a not-for-profit would pay. But it's if you're a private developer coming in, you're paying the taxes that are there. I mean, you know, I'm not an expert in this, but you always see this tax break, that tax break. So I don't know how it actually all fits out, but it's not like if you come into this district, you're a for-profit developer, you get a tax, you know, break from the city of Buffalo, to the best of my knowledge, unless it's changed recently.
Okay, thank you. Next question here is from Kendred Armstead, who asks, what were the funding sources secured to develop the Innovation District around the BNMC? Is the district a product of public-private partnerships? What entities are represented in the nonprofit that oversees O&M and revenue recapture for the long-term sustainability of it?
Yeah, so what happened in the early days was I mentioned a foundation that threw in seed money to help us get going what we were doing. And so we had, from the private sector foundations, not many companies invested in what we were doing at the time. But then the state and the federal government gave us money for infrastructure and in certain cases to buy real estate. And so our team really built this out, and we'd never put money, whether it was philanthropic or government money, into paying salaries. We built it out by putting money into assets. So then we built up those assets that throw off the cash, whether through a lease or some sort of development like that. And then we run the transportation system, which generates the revenue. So the operations and maintenance side of it is actually what our team does. And we'll oversee all of that in the common areas, not on people's specific real estate, but in the common areas, the streets, the sidewalks, trees, lights. And we actually have a consultant in town today who's working through mapping that out. That might be a new structure that we put in place to start to think about how we make that even more of a sustainable model for the long haul, because the person asking the question is asking the right question. Building something is one thing. Having a structure in place to maintain, manage, and operate it is a whole different thing. And I think a lot of times people get the original capital to do something, but they don't have the dollars to continue it. And that's what we're trying to strengthen, that sustainability model. It's good right now, but we want to have it for years and years to come.
Gotcha. Okay. Here's another one from Ellen McCarthy, who asks, what were the most significant points you made to convince the medical institutions to participate and go beyond their everyday mission? And what was their self-interest that you could appeal to?
It's a great question. And I would say it all started around parking, which everybody on this call probably, that's all we talk about, right? It didn't matter about the great clinical care that was here. It was about, where am I going to park? And so that's what people, almost was like a selfish interest when we started planning, was around, okay, an individual institution in the city of Buffalo couldn't do the parking by themselves. So grouping it together was an opportunity to do it. But the more important part was, I do have to give a lot of credit to Tom Beecher and Bill Joyce, who were the original chairs of the board. And what they did was they built a table of trust, and they made it so they continued. It wasn't just a couple meetings and we pat each other on the back and feel good about it. It was a continuous conversation of building trust amongst those institutions. So By working together, yes, it was around parking, but it was also, again, one of the key points that I talked about earlier. The foundations and the government said, if you don't come together, we're not going to continue funding. So that was also another carrot that was out there that said, hey, if you do this, you'll get X. And you know, I think that answers your question. I hope it did. And anybody who if you've asked a question, I haven't totally answered it. My contact information has been throughout this, I think. You know, you can ping me on LinkedIn, and we can continue a conversation anytime.
Yeah, we have received a couple questions about folks who want to reach out to you, so I'm sure you'll be getting some follow-up from them. In fact, one of them is Ann B. Daigle, who's asking if you're familiar with the Memphis Medical Collaborative. That's a similar effort. It's been very successful in local redevelopment around the hospital, building partnerships and in civic engagement.
Great. I don't know it in detail. I've heard of it, but I don't know it in detail. And we're always learning about it. We actually have, there's one that's made up of Rust Belt. I don't know what we call the group, but it's, you know, it's got Cleveland, it's got St. Louis, it's got Pittsburgh, Rochester, it's got a whole bunch of the Detroit groups around this area that meet on an annual basis. So two people from our team will go down there and meet with the groups and kind of learn from each other. And again, that's what the Global Institute for Innovation Districts is doing too. And that's where I've heard of Memphis throughout all of these. There's a lot of these groups, and I think the most important thing is continuing talking to other organizations. So I'd love to learn from a group like Memphis and what you've learned from it. And I think that's the most important thing.
Great, thank you. We've got several comments from Jocelyn Bello, and one of hers is a question. Are you working with 43 North for community and career development?
Yeah, so we know 43 North, they used to be in our building, they're down the street, they're running, and when I said, like, you know, they're doing a great thing of bringing companies, like the state gave a bunch of money to them to kind of recruit companies. And, you know, that's one aspect of the ecosystem, which I think is really, really critical. What I'm really focused on is the E4All side of things and making sure that when we talk about entrepreneurship, we talk about innovation, we're looking at the holistic part, that everybody feels comfortable being a part of an environment. And so I think you need all of these pieces. And 43 North is one of the many pieces that communities need. And just so people know, 43 North was basically a pitch. It is a pitch competition where people from around the world pitch their business idea, and then they get either $500,000 or $1 million, something like that. It changes a little bit here and there. It's tweaked to move their company to Buffalo. You know, and some of those have stuck, some haven't stuck. And I just think as you're building out the ecosystem, you need to make sure that you're doing all of these different components that make a great city and innovation district.
Great, thanks, Matt. We have a few more here. We always never get to all of them, but want to get as many in as we can. And the next one is from Chelsea Elmbrooker, who's asking, can you talk more about wealth building for people of color and low income, their access to financing and partnering with minority developers and so on?
Yeah, so again, I don't want to portray that I'm an expert whatsoever in that space. People on our team have different skill sets within that. But one of the things I was mentioning was I mentioned E4All, again, continuing to learn from that. Desh Despande, who I mentioned, we're working on a couple things. And what we started to say was we have a small little seed fund here at the BNMC. And what we're trying to do is leverage that little seed fund to be more. And what we're doing is you know, for the types of organizations you were just talking about, a lot of times banks can't finance them, but CDFIs can. And so we're partnering with local CDFIs. Pursuit is one of the ones in Buffalo that we actually have work with. We don't have a signed deal with them, but they put a really interesting proposal on the table. And what it was that we'd use some of our loan fund that we were talking about, and we would create like a loan loss reserve to help get dollars to these individuals. And so it would be a loan, but with really, really limited strings on it at an appropriate borrowing rate, because you know, we've seen so many people in these situations that what they hear is they go and they loan it, they go for a loan, they have to mortgage their house, they have to mortgage themselves, they have to, just sign away everything. And that's not the way to do this. And if you look at a lot of these, you mentioned like a 43 North, and it's not just them, but the companies that I'm putting in that category, a lot of times they have these social networks that are friends and family that loan money out, and it's at friendly terms, and they're not going to come take your house from you. And I would say that's a lot of what we're trying to build here. There's some great CDFIs, like there's a WEDI, which is the Westminster Economic Development Institute or agency or something like that in our community. They're a small CDFI that's working with a lot of refugee community in the community. So I guess to answer the question, we're not experts in this, but we're working with a lot of people that are doing this. And this is an absolute area that I think, and Desh wants to figure out how to do this too, is E4All, what it's doing right now is great. I think to get even stronger outcomes, we need to figure out how to get capital to the table in a way that friends and family and a network that I might interact in have.
Thank you. Just a couple more here. Next one is from Michael Greenwald, who asks, I may have missed it, but the thrust of this presentation has been about collaboration with neighborhood and nonprofit groups. But how do your activities fit into and inform the larger comprehensive planning for the city of Buffalo?
So we're a component of it. And I would say, back to, again, I'm talking, he's getting a lot of press today. Jamie on our team is meeting with the Office of Strategic Planning. All the planning, when someone asked me about the Metropolitan Planning Agency, when we have what we call work councils, whether that's on transportation, public safety, all the different areas like that, representatives from the city are tied into all of those components that we have. So where it makes sense, our team is engaged with the city of Buffalo.
Okay, next one is, you mentioned the percentage of building permits pulled within close proximity to the campus. What amount was mixed use and residential to encourage a walkable, bikeable, integrated neighborhood with various uses? And is there a need for more affordable housing near the campus? And if so, how are you addressing that?
Yeah, I don't know the percentage, but I would say there's a lot of that. And a lot of the places are walkable to the campus. They're, as I said, Go Bike has really pushed bike lanes throughout our city, while some people say it slows up traffic. The city of Buffalo, when someone says we have traffic, that means you were delayed 5 minutes. So, having a focus on this and doing this, I got to give the mayor credit for taking this on and building that type of stuff out there. Sorry, at the beginning of it, neighborhoods, I lost the train of thought on that because I was focusing on the transportation. But what was the beginning of that question? Because it was an important question.
I was talking about the number of building permits pulled within the campus and the residential mixed use and affordable housing components.
Affordable housing, that's what that was. I was confusing it. So affordable housing is critical. When I was talking about the development with the church that we're, running into a little bit of challenge right now, it's not that we don't want affordable housing. We 100% want that around here. There's a bunch coming up just, on the north end of our campus that we've been very supportive of. We just want to make sure that any type of planning that's here is tied into the whole ecosystem for the community and it fits in. So affordable housing is critical because prices are getting, as I said, it's still very affordable here, but at certain thresholds, it's not affordable. So we need to make sure that that's in place. And it's along the subway line, and it's along the bus lines that are the efficient bus lines. We have to be really, really conscious of that as we're doing. And I'm not an expert in the housing side at all.
Okay. Yeah, we did get other questions about the affordable housing component. I guess I'll end with this question. It's a bit technical, but I think Michelle Ryan, who asks it, is very interested. Was the nonprofit LLC that owned for-profit entities a 501c3 or C6? And could you explain that structure a bit more and how revenue was reinvested?
Yeah, so it's a 501c3, and the LLCs are sole member LLCs owned by the not-for-profit. And then all the money that is generated runs the operations. So when someone was saying, how do you have the maintenance and operations and who's overseeing that, that's what we're overseeing. Where we need to go deeper as the investments get older and more people are starting to move on the campus, how do you start to share equitably in, paying for all those costs? Because there's a lot more players on the campus that can start to participate in paying for, fixing the sidewalks and the lighting and the streets around here, because that's the environment that we're creating here. And so I think I answered your question, but feel free to reach out to me if you want to talk deeper about that.
Great, thank you. And we will share all the questions and comments with Matt as well afterwards so that he can see that. And we've actually have all of your contact information up on the screen right now, including Twitter and LinkedIn. And we've been sending that information out via the chat throughout. So hopefully everyone who can connect will connect with you.
Email is just sorry to interrupt, but email is a great way that I can keep that structured and organized to get back to people.
Okay, excellent. Well, we've kind of run out of time, but we wanted to give you a chance to kind of give us some final thoughts and takeaways for today.
So continue to work together. I think the clean tech revolution that our government is about to invest in, let's make sure we do that in a responsible way that benefits all, and go Bills.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. Thanks for being with us today. Excellent. With that, we're going to conclude our webinar, City Forward, How Innovation Districts Can Embrace Risk and Strengthen Community. I'd like to offer a great big thank you to Matt Enstice for a great presentation, to everyone who attended today, and to John Coleman, our communications and technology guru, who helps to make this all happen. The complete recording of today's webinar will be posted on smartgrowth.org. Also, for those who have requested one, all attendees will receive an email that will contain a link to a personalized certificate of participation. Please look for this follow-up email if you need the certificate to claim other continuing education credits. When you exit from today's webinar, you will be asked to participate in a short evaluation. Please take a few moments to provide feedback so that we can continue to improve the webinar experience for you. And finally, keep an eye on smartgrowth.org and your email inbox for details on other future webinars, including Farms Under Threat 2040, Choosing an Abundant Future with the American Farmland Trust this Thursday. Our annual Walktober Walk-in-Our series with the Maryland Department of Transportation launches next Thursday with national perspectives on walking and pedestrian safety. And then finally, on October 11th, a Tuesday, the Park Maker and the Form Giver, How Frederick Law Olmsted and Henry Hobson Richardson Reinvented America's Public Spaces, as well as other walk-in-ours throughout the month of October. With that, I wish everyone a great day.